IWC released their latest iteration of the Genta design Indyunor back in March at Watches and Wonders 2023. I got to see all 4 variations in person and walked away quite impressed. I particularly enjoyed the one with the aqua green dial, which was gorgeous in person, but to each their own. Nonetheless, with this new Indyunor, IWC did a pretty good job of not just reissuing an old design, kind of like what Vacheron Constantin did with the 222, but creating a modern version that improves upon the old one in quite a few ways without straying too far from its roots. All was great, in my mind at least, but then the price was announced, which was $11,700, and a lot of people were not happy. So, is this watch worth the price? Well, I went to this overly dramatic pedestrian freeway crossing to think this all over, and eventually, I found an answer. IWC originally announced the Indyunor all the way back in 1955 and touted it as extremely accurate and highly resistant to magnetism, which it was, but this new version is directly inspired by the Genta design Indyunor SL that was released in 1976. By this time, Genta already had a few iconic designs under his belt, most notably the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. He was also responsible for the just as famous Patek Philippe Nautilus, which was introduced in the same year as the Indyunor design, again in 1976. The watch world wanted stainless steel watches with integrated bracelets, and Genta was the man to give it to them. I mean, he popularized the design. Unfortunately for IWC, unlike the Royal Oak and Nautilus, the Indyunor never quite saw the same level of demand from consumers. Throughout the years, the Indyunor line saw a few changes, mainly an increase in size, but it also slowly strayed further and further away from the OG Genta design, and it felt a little neglected by IWC. The DNA was always sorta there, but it wasn't quite working for the modern consumer. Now, here we are in 2023, and the craze for integrated stainless steel watches feels like it's at an all-time high, and luckily for IWC, they have a design from the king of these integrated stainless steel watches in their back pocket. All they had to do was tastefully modernize the SL, which I'm not a designer, but I can imagine it being easier said than done. What IWC came up with is this felt beauty that's the closest they've ever been to the 1976 Genta design. Look, the Indyunor SL wasn't the coolest watch in the world, and probably for good reason. While it shared similarities to the Nautilus and Royal Oak's more daring looks, for the time it felt like a dulled down, safer variant. It wasn't bad, it just felt safe, which can be a good thing if you already have an established iconic model and you make incremental updates throughout the years, a la the Rolex Submariner. But if you're coming out with a brand new design, it's gotta turn some heads. The original didn't quite accomplish that, but now in a sea of integrated stainless steel watches, the new Indyunor, while still not quite daring, looks fantastic. It retains the same diameter as the SL at 40mm and measures in at only 10.7mm thin, which helps this thing melt on my 7.25-inch wrist. And unlike the original, the bezel screws are actually symmetrical, which I think is a much better look because it appears more premium. But I can understand if you miss the randomized asymmetrical charm of the original. You also still have that H-Link integrated bracelet that's nearly as wide as the case itself, but there's a dramatic taper as it moves towards the clasp, which I think looks quite nice. Speaking of the clasp, there are no micro adjustment capabilities with or without a tool, so you're gonna have to hope this thing fits you. I was able to find the perfect fit, and hopefully you can too. Also, I'm not usually a fan of butterfly clasps since they tend to look a little flat on the underside of my wrist, but somehow I didn't really experience that with the Indyunor, which is great. The butterfly clasp allows the bracelet to just look clean. No bulky, massive, sporty gliding systems, just a clean connection that mimics a link with a IWC engraving on it. The new dial actually has a lot more depth this time around, with a pattern that some say is reminiscent of the American flag. The model I got to borrow is black, but there's also the aqua green that I mentioned earlier and is my fave. There's a white, and there's also a gray that's housed in a titanium case and bracelet. That version is $14,600. We're getting up there. A few of my colleagues really liked that one, but it was probably my least favorite. Inside of the Ingenieur, you'll find IWC's caliber 32111 that's automatic, beats at 4 Hz, and has a whopping 120-hour power reserve. That's nearly double what you'll find in any time and date Rolex, Omega, Patek, and AP. It is great. It's accurate too, at least the one that I got to borrow, as it only gained about 1 second per day, which was excellent. Alright, here's the is the watch worth it part. It's funny because you can find this same movement in IWC's very own Mark 20. And on a stainless steel bracelet, it's almost half the price of the Ingenieur at $6,150. Both stainless steel, both with 100 meters of water resistance, both with a time and date complication, and both have a soft iron inner case to protect the movement from the effects of magnetic fields. So what's the deal? Why so much more? And again, is the Ingenieur worth that $11,700 price? When you have a watch in your catalog with eerily similar specs that's half the price of your new release, people will naturally scratch their heads. Do I like the Ingenieur more than a Mark 20? Yeah, I do. I like the design and it's just more interesting to look at, but I'd probably lean towards purchasing a Mark 20 instead. But for IWC, I don't think they're targeting someone that's looking for a Mark 20. They're looking upmarket. Just so you know, you can't just buy this thing. You gotta put down a deposit, and you can only do that at IWC boutiques and not authorized dealers, and the wait is quite long. Now, forget about the Mark 20s. If you're a Royal Oak or Nautilus fan and can't afford or don't want to shell out over 60 to 70 grand for one, and that's retail price, then there's a watch that was made by the same legendary designer that's a fraction of the price that personally I think looks incredible, especially in aqua green. When you think of it that way, well, is it worth it then? That's up to you.